Welcome everyone, this is Brian from the marketing team here at CPOMS. Thanks for joining us. Hope you've all had a restful summer and a smooth return back to school. Today's session is called Understanding and Preventing Self-Harm and Suicide, a Whole School Approach. And here's a quick overview of our agenda for today. Shortly I'll be handing over to our guest speaker for the session, and we'll be taking a brief look at how CPOMS can support your setting with some of the things discussed in today's session as well. There will also be an opportunity to ask some questions at the end with a short Q&A before we do wrap up. I'm very pleased to have a fantastic guest speaker with us today. We've got Dr. Asha Patel, clinical psychologist and founder at Innovative Minds. Thanks for joining us, Asha. I hope you're well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm great. Thank you.
Brilliant. And would you like to tell us a little bit about your background and the work Innovative Minds do and EduPod to support children?
Absolutely. So I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, and my background is being in forensic mental health. So I've worked in medium secure services with individuals that have committed really serious offences, and typical have been high profile. What led me to finding Innovative Minds about 10 years ago was actually the frustration that I was working at the wrong end of the spectrum. A lot of my patients had experienced childhood trauma and not been able to access the early support and help that they needed. So what we do at Innovative Minds is support schools to embed whole school approaches to mental health. And actually, you can make a bigger difference if I share my knowledge, my skills, our approaches with you. You can actually create whole school approaches to mental health, make systemic changes, and upskill everybody that's with the children on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to children being referred for therapy. Everybody's mental health can benefit. I'm going to be sharing later about EduPod, so our partnership with CPOMS, of how first 100 schools, CPOMS school users, are able to get a 50% discount rate on EduPod, and that's to support the transformation of a whole school approach to mental health, because as you'll know, safeguarding and everything that comes along, there's typically a mental health related difficulty that's taking place. So we really want to blend safeguarding practice with whole school approaches to mental health.
Oh, amazing. Really pleased to have you with us for today's webinar and aligning with World Suicide Prevention Day as well. So before I do hand over to Asha for the full presentation, I've just got a few housekeeping points to cover so that everybody can get the most out of watching the session today. So just to confirm, we will be recording the webinar today. You'll receive an email link within about 48 hours after this session where you can watch it back on demand, or you can share it with your colleagues and anyone else who might benefit from it if they couldn't make the live session today. In case you're not familiar with the webinar format, if you are watching live today, your microphone and your camera are turned off automatically throughout, so we can't see or hear you in the audience, but there are some ways you can interact with us. You will see a question box on your screen where you can type in a question at any time. As I mentioned, there will be a bit of a Q&A at the end before we wrap up, so please do send your questions in. We'll try and get through as many of them as we can in the time available. There's also some emoji icons you can use as we go along, so please do feel free to click those as we like to see your reactions popping up. You can go ahead and try some of those out now if you like, if you've found them. You can also move and resize the windows on your screen just by clicking in the corners and dragging them around to make them work best for your setup. And finally, at the end of the webinar, there will be a feedback form. I'd be very grateful if you could just take a minute to fill that in with your comments as well. So with all that information out the way, I'll hand over to Asha to take us through the topic.
Thank you so much. So today's topic is all about self-harm and suicide, and I really want to stress about the importance of looking after yourself. So the work that we do, we will all be affected by the young people and our own personal people in our lives as well. So whether that's family and friends, you might be going through something at the moment. So if there is anything that I'm talking about today or anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, listen to your body, look after yourself, step away. You can catch up later on the recording. And also do flag up if you do need some support afterwards, that we can get in touch with you. Now, there's a lot to cover in today's session, and the reason why there's a lot is because it's all interrelated. it is Suicide Prevention Day today, but actually I felt like we can't talk about suicide without talking about self-harm. And we're also going to talk about childhood trauma and its impact. There's a lot of work going across the UK that's talked about trauma-informed practice. And actually, this is a really great opportunity to think about how we can support our students from a trauma-informed approach, and how we can also look at more systemic approaches so your school is in a position to be able to support children and young people that are experiencing self-harm and suicidal thoughts. Now, when we talk about childhood trauma and its impact, now lots of people have different definitions of what trauma is. And often as adults, we start to want to put things into a hierarchy. So it might be, for example, a certain type of abuse or neglect is more traumatic than another type of an incident that's taken place for a young person. But actually what we know is actually trauma can be many things. It can be something that's happened, or actually something that hasn't happened. So it can be something that actually a young person's actually gone without, or they've not had a primary caregiver that's been able to show them love and affection and be there for them. It might have been that they've grown up in poverty. So I want you to think about trauma and your understanding of trauma and any biases that you may hold, because that will influence in terms of how you respond and support children and young people. Now, what we know about trauma-informed practice, it's not a switch that you can just switch on and off depending what conversation you are in with a young person. So, for example, being trauma-informed, it means you're putting on a lens. You're looking at things from a different perspective. You're now starting to see a young person and being more curious about, well, what's happened to them, as opposed to thinking, well, what have they done? You're asking yourself more questions around what is it that that young person needs? How is it that I can show up? How is it that I can present myself? How is it that what clothes do I wear? What kind of scents am I mindful of? And all of these things are really important, because what we do know is trauma memories are actually stored as sensory memories in the body. Now, what do I mean by that? Often we think about trauma and the difficulties that we're experiencing are stored in our brain, and we take a real cognitive-based approach to it. But what we actually know is trauma is stored within our sensory system. So the things that we touch, our smell, our hearing, our taste, what we see, everything is there, and that means the body is keeping the score. Now, that's really important for us to know and recognise, because if you think about how we show up and the colours of the clothes, scents that we use around the schools, it might be even food smells that are taking place, it might be the physical environment in terms of how it looks, that could be quite triggering for a young person. And their body is constantly scanning for cues of safety and cues of threat. Now, what do I mean by that? Is constantly our body is wired to be able to scan for information to look out to keep us safe and keep us well. And that same goes for the adults too. So if we're mindful around trauma being stored in our body as sensory memories, we can also be mindful about how we can offer more cues of safety, so messages can be sent back to the brain to say, actually, I'm okay, I'm safe, and I'm well. And you may have come across Dr. Dan Siegel's hand-brain model. And this model uses the hand, and it's a real quick and easy way to really think about and to communicate with young people and adults about how our brain, how our body and brain works together, and what happens when we're feeling safe and unsafe. So if you hold your hand out like that, the bottom part of your brain is the safety survival part. So it's like the meerkat part of your brain. It's always checking for danger. And then you've got the thumb, and now that part is the feelings memories. So for example, if you got an ice cream and you dropped it, you're really looking forward to that ice cream. The next time you have an ice cream, you're going to remember that time you dropped it. And then you've got the thinking part of the brain. And this is where all the high functioning things take place. So things around perspective taking, being able to think, actually, it's the last chocolate in the staff room. Do I take it? Do I not? Do I give it to somebody else? That is where all that high executive functioning takes place. When we're feeling safe and calm, all three parts of the brain work together. Now, the brain is attached to the body. And if you think about it, it makes sense because our body is bigger than our brain. It's larger than our brain. So the body is constantly scanning for information to send to the brain to say, actually, I'm not feeling quite safe. I'm not feeling okay. That then flicks the brain into safety survival mode. So the thinking part of the brain gets switched offline. So our job, why we're here, and the way that we can interact and support our students and our colleagues is to help the brain to feel safe and calm. And we do that via the body. And I'll come on to some strategies that you can use to be able to do that. Now, I'm just setting up the scene with this information because that'll help you then to think about moving on to engaging with young people that are engaging in self-harming behaviours and maybe having suicide ideation. So what do we mean when we're talking about self-harm? Now, what we've seen across the education sector is that there's an increase in young people engaging in self-harming behaviours. And one of the things for us to think about is actually as well, it's happening at a younger age as well. So what can often happen is we're getting primary schools that are coming to us and saying that the first time that they've got children that are engaging in self-harming behaviours and they're not really sure what they can do. Now, what is self-harm? It's really important for us to think about what is the function of self-harm, because often people think that maybe it's an attention-seeking behaviour. Now, I want us to think about self-harm as a way of it to communicate distress. And it might be for some young people giving relief from emotional pain that they're experiencing. For some young people as well, it might be this ability to regain a sense of control. Also, it could be for self-punishment that they're feeling feelings such as shame and guilt. Now, the reason why we call it a self-harming behaviour is because it is a behaviour. It's not a mental illness, it's not a disorder. And that's really important to remember, because when you're thinking about referrals to CAMHS or trying to communicate what's going on for this young person and you're focused on the self-harming behaviour, that makes it really difficult for referrals to get accepted into CAMHS. Now, there's so many different forms of self-harm as well, and this is where it requires you to take a formulation approach and a curious approach as to the behaviours that that young person is presenting with. So some more forms of self-harm that we quite see might be self-harm. It might be exercising too much. It could be putting themselves in risky situations such as alcohol. It could also be things like getting into fights with other people. Now, when you talk about self-harm and when you're talking about self-harm with your colleagues, if you do get people talking about its attention seeking, I really want you to use different phrases just to be able to correct people. And the reason why we use different phrases is because people then have a different response. So if everybody thinks that, well, self-harm, people are doing that for attention, what happens is then everybody starts to nod the head and be like, oh yeah, they're attention seeking. Now, what that ends up happening is people don't actually give the support that's required. That young person requires connection with somebody. They require an adult that they can feel safe with, feel vulnerable with. If you're an adult that's feeling like this young person's doing it because they're seeking attention, how you respond is going to be very different. You might even start to pull yourself away from that young person. You also might start to think about more punitive-based approaches for them. So what we're thinking about is we're using phrases like that young person is connection seeking, they're help seeking. And when you start to shift your language, you also start to notice how you self-respond and how other people around you respond. Now, here's some myths that we often come across. Self-harm is an illness or a disorder. It's not. We've spoken about it as being a behaviour, and that you've got to stop this young person from self-harming. So if your end goal is to get them to stop completely and you start talking about promise me not to, that you're not going to self-harm it anymore, or imagine how bad your mum feels, or are you trying to guilt trip that young person to stop self-harming? That's not going to be helpful. And if anything, we're just setting up that young person to fail. Now, there is something about keeping that young person safe and keeping yourself safe, and we'll come on to managing and formulating risk. But what we have been seeing is people like getting children to sign contracts that they're never going to self-harm before. So just be mindful that that is not a really good way to move forward and support children. Now, the other thing that I just want to touch upon is self-harm and self-injury. There may be some schools, special schools, primary schools, alternative provision schools, mainstream schools that are supporting children that may have neurodiverse needs, might have autism, they might have sensory needs. And therefore, it's really important to notice the difference between self-harm and self-injury. Self-harm and self-injury. So self-harm is evident when there's intent to cause harm to oneself. So often people say, well, they're headbanging. I don't think it's self-harm. I feel like it's a sensory need. And this is why it's really important to start to be curious about what the behaviour is communicating. What is the function of that behaviour? Is it there to because of emotional distress that they're experiencing and the emotional pain that they're experiencing? Or is it because of a sensory need that's taking place? And it's really important to also recognise that your role within the education sector is not necessarily to do the diagnosis, but to be presenting the information. And by being curious, you'll be able to look at when self-harming behaviours are taking place, in what context, so that you can offer that information to other professionals. Now, why would a young person self-harm? And it can be so many different reasons for each individual. And the reason why I say this is because often what you get, and particular practitioners that have been working in the sector for a long, long time, may feel that, well, we've seen everything before, we've heard it all, we've seen it all. But everybody self-harm for a different reason, and the function of self-harming may differ as well. So I've worked with young people that have engaged in self-harming behaviours very differently. So they might be cutting, but they also might be swallowing. And swallowing not to end their life, but swallowing to get a temporary relief. Now, every time that young person engaged in different forms of self-harm, it was because there was an underlying reason. Cutting for that young person was to feel something, to escape from the emotional pain and to experience the physical pain, whereas swallowing was to get some relief in terms of trying to make themselves unconscious. Now, also can be for very, very many different reasons, and this is where you're safeguarding. So if you're using CPOMs and you've got information that's coming across in terms of this young person maybe a victim of domestic abuse or experiencing domestic abuse, and maybe a victim of exploitation or at risk of exploitation, it also might be a way of communicating that they're not okay, that they're trying to express something that they can't verbalise, they can't find the words to verbalise. So by you holding this curiosity and formulating and finding out information and hypothesizing what may be taking place with this young person helps you to understand more. Now, often we go into this mode where we want to ask the young people lots of information, lots of questions. Why would you do that? How could you do something differently next time? What's helped previously? And then you might get this blank expression for a young person, or then you might feel like they're playing lip service. And that's because if you go back to our safety survival part of the brain, the thinking brain is switched offline. They've gone into safety survival response. So us trying to talk to them and engage with them at that point, it's not really going to be effective because all three parts of the brain are not working together. Now, with this, it's also to think about your own views, values, and beliefs around self-harm and suicide, because this will all interplay with how you approach young people, how you set up your policies and your procedures and support staff. If you can't understand it because you've never experienced it, or you kind of think, well, how does somebody get to that place? Or you feel there's a need that somebody just needs to stop, that will have a full impact in terms of how you engage and how you're able to have those empathic conversations with a young person. Now, what can you do to help? First and foremost, it's helping by being with. Now, safety will always come first, so keeping yourself safe as well. So knowing when to engage, or whether you need other staff members with you if somebody's actively engaging in self-harm. Also, can they be left alone? Do they need to be left with somebody else while you go and connect and get help? Does that need to be passed on to your designated safeguarding lead? Who is it that's going to take the lead on that? Now, when we're talking about asking, this is going to be really critical, because remember, your job is to help that young person, to help their body and brain to feel safe and calm again. So all three parts of their brain and their body is feeling safe. The only way that you're going to be able to do that is if you can help calm the body. If you can help calm the body and help that feel regulated through moments of co-regulation, that is then going to be able to engage all three parts of the brain so they can engage with you. So think about your role, think about how you show up. It might be that you're really terrified because you kind of thinking, oh, what is it I'm going to come into? What kind of questions do I need to ask, and what responses am I going to give? The more that you can ground yourself, the more that you can be in a position to recognize how your own body is feeling, that's going to help you in good stead. So part of this is also thinking about, are you aware of how your body feels when you're maybe feeling quite anxious about something, quite worried? How does that present? How are you able to calm yourself and regulate yourself so you're in a better position to be able to offer moments of co-regulation for that young person? And see it as that young person is going to be borrowing your nervous system to help them feel safe and calm. They don't want to be borrowing your nervous system if you're dysregulated. They actually need to be with somebody that can hold that space. Now, you need to be thinking around appropriate time and place, but you do need to be asking about suicide as well, because what we do know is there's an increased risk of suicide if a young person is engaging in self-harming behaviours as well. Also, if that young person is engaging in alcohol and substance misuse, that also increases risk for people to act on self-harm and suicidal thoughts. Now, the other thing for you to be mindful is if a young person, and this may be more older children, but if you do know that a young person is on medication, say antidepressant medication, and they're experiencing thoughts around self-harm and suicide, that also increases risk. And it's really important that you're mindful of when medication is being introduced. Why does that happen? Well, what happens is sometimes they might be having self-harm and suicidal thoughts, but their depression puts them in a state that actually they don't really have the motivation to be able to act on it. So then what happens, and this also applies to adults, what happens is when you introduce medication, that lifts the mood, and therefore they still might have self-harm and suicidal thoughts, but now they've also got some motivation to act upon those and energy to be able to do that. So that's just been something just to be aware of when you're working with other professionals, that you are mindful of that. Now, what we do is around risk formulation, and you will be a part of that risk formulation. So you're looking to understand in terms of how are they self-harming, where, how frequent is it, what do they do to care for their wounds? And again, this is around safety, risk of infection, and have they got any suicidal thoughts and plans? Now, it's really important for us to think about how comfortable are you with asking that direct question. Do you have any thoughts of killing yourself? Do you have any thoughts of harming yourself? And from a safeguarding perspective, I know for other safeguarding, you can't ask direct questions, you can't ask leading questions. But for self-harm, for suicide, you can. And it's really important that you do ask a direct question and you document it as well. This will all help form your risk formulation. It'll also then start to inform how you minimise risk and create strategies to minimise those risks. Now, something that we see with self-harm or individuals that are experiencing suicide ideation, we talk about offering alternative methods or distraction techniques. Now, an alternative method, if you are advised by professionals, it might be use of elastic bands, it might be drawing red pen instead, or using ice cubes, it's really important that you seek guidance from professionals and that you understand your school and your organisation policies and procedures around this as well. They're also known as harm minimisation strategies. Now, the reason why I don't use the term distraction techniques, because I find it really invalidating. Imagine that you're experiencing this level of emotional distress, that the only way that you can seek comfort and relief from pain is to actually harm yourself or contemplate taking your own life. And then somebody comes along and says, oh, here, go and use this technique to distract yourself. Go and do some mindfulness colouring, listening to some music, splash water on your face. That'll distract you from that. That's really invalidating and quite insensitive as well from us as adults to be recommending. And actually what those strategies are doing are they're soothing the body. They're helping the body to feel safe, calm and regulated. So they're actually soothing techniques. And by doing that, remember our hand-brain model, those techniques, those strategies that the young person is engaging is to help the body to feel safe and calm again. So it can send signals to the brain to say, I'm feeling safe, I'm feeling calm, and it's okay. So just be mindful around your language and let's start shifting the dialogue from distraction techniques to self-soothing techniques or calming, body-based calming strategies. Now, the reality of self-harm is we can never stop somebody from engaging in self-harming behaviours. We can support that young person, but you might never be able to prevent it. So we're trying to minimise risk. You're never going to be able to eradicate risk. For some young people, for some adults, it might be that self-harming behaviour is actually keeping them alive. And I have worked with young people, I've worked with adults where actually by them being able to have that mechanism, that help-seeking strategy there. Remember, they're doing it because it works. It has a function to them. Yes, it might be maladaptive. It might be harmful to them, but it's helping for something else. There may be this unintentional risk of dying. And actually as well, it's okay to think about the impact it has on you. And we're going to come on to vicarious trauma. But you are human, and it's important that you don't blame yourself as well. But it's really important to make sure that you document risk, you communicate the conversations that you're having, and particularly when a young person is transitioning between schools. Really sadly, when a young person does end their life and reviews are taking place, it's often where communication between schools and transitions, where that's fallen by the wayside and is increased risk. Now we're going to move on to suicide. Now, suicidal behaviour exists along a continuum. So you might get suicidal ideation whereby somebody's thinking about ending one's life. They might also go to developing a plan, and they might then have a suicide attempt that's non-fatal. So it might be an overdose. It might be that they've overdosed and letting somebody know, to ending one life. And it's really important to remember this as a continuum. Often you might hear young people that constantly talk about suicide and ending their life, and then we've become quite numb to it, or it's become quite the norm. So we stop taking it seriously. But remember, this continuum can fluctuate. It can fluctuate for people on a day-to-day basis. It might be that they have fleeting thoughts. It might be that there's a specific event that's taking place in their life. It might be that they're going through bereavement. So it's really important to remember about the continuum and where somebody might be. Now, what is suicide? It happens when pain exceeds the resources for coping with the emotional pain. Most don't want to die, they want the pain to stop. And we also see from the statistics is there's a higher rate of males completing suicide. Now, the really sad part of it, and what you'll often see as well, is that after a lot of people that are experiencing suicidal ideation or do go on to complete suicide don't receive the treatment either. Now, there will be young people that you're working with and you're trying to support that you know that there is ongoing risk around suicide, and they might have not been deemed unwell enough to be able to access help and support, or that they may not attend. So actually they don't want to engage with a CAMHS worker that they've never met before. They don't want to be referred to a specialist service, or they can't get there for whatever reason that might be. So you, as a safe, trusted adult in the school that they already know, they already trust, they already feel safe in, is the one that can make the difference. Now, you don't need to have a magic wand, and you don't need to be a psychologist. It's actually the connection, it's the relationship that you hold, that your team will hold with that young person, and being able to sit with that young person in the moment when they're in distress, when they're talking about self-harm or suicide ideation, and you're able to hold and manage that space. You're not interested in trying to problem solve it for them. So you need to be really comfortable with sitting with the uncomfortable feelings, because that is where you're going to help their body and brain to feel safe and calm again. Now, what we know about the body and brain is those feelings of anxiety, those really strong feelings of shame and humiliation, those that take place in the body response. Now, they can only cope with them, and the body can only live with them for so long before it rides. So how can you be that cue of safety, that space for that young person to be able to support them? Now, helping you and creating risk formulation. Always keep yourself safe and always be checking in with individuals. If you're a designated safeguarding lead, if you're a pastoral worker, if you're senior leadership team, if you're in headship, it's a really lonely place to be, and there's a lot that you carry and you take home with you. There's often people that say to me, I don't take my work home with me. And I say that is just not possible. And the reason for that is physically you might leave your laptop, you might shut things down. But every time you smell something, every time you hear a certain song, every time you see something specifically, it's going to take you back to something work related, whether it's with a colleague, whether it's a young person. You hear somebody's name, it's going to make you think about a child that you worked with. You see something on TV, it's going to make you think about that young person that actually just don't know what happened to them. You're left curious and wondering what happened. Now, when you're assessing risk for suicide, you need to ask these direct questions. Again, it's making sure that you're feeling comfortable with it and your team are also comfortable with that as well. So put it out there, get people to ask the questions, and also have conversations around, well, what does that feel like to ask that? And often people don't ask anything in the fear that they're going to say something wrong, or they're going to make it worse, or they're going to even put the thought of self-harm and suicide in someone's mind, and they've not previously thought about that. That is not the case at all. Actually, young people want us to ask about self-harm and suicide. They want us to ask direct questions because they can't communicate it themselves. They don't find the words, they don't have the way to verbalize it. So by us asking the question, we're actually giving them an opening and an opportunity to say, yes, I am struggling. Do you know what? They might also say no, and your gut feeling is saying, I don't think that's true. I still think there's a risk. It's okay to document. You've asked the question and they said no, but you can still say, well, actually, from my observations, and again, it's your observations, it's not your judgment, this is what's taking place. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about harming yourself? How long have you felt this way for? Have you thought about how and when? This is to assess if there's a plan. So think about that continuum. They've got suicidal thoughts. Have they got a plan? If they've got a plan, okay, when is it? How is it? What they're going to do? Have they got the means to act on that plan? Have they felt like this before, and what's helped? And also, do they have the means available to them to continue with their plan? Now, you might find, well, actually, they don't stay with you long enough for you to be able to ask all those questions. It might be that you ask the first one and they shut it all down. The fact is that you've asked, you're able to document it, you've opened the door for that conversation to take place. Now, the things to be mindful of not what to do is to be like, oh, okay, I'm just going to grab somebody else to have this conversation. And you go and get that individual that works in the school that everybody gravitates to. And that's not because they've got a magic wand or they've trained as a senior mental health lead or a mental health first aider. It's because that person has a way of being with the students and with the adults. And what you want to do from a whole school approach is actually be able to pass that on to everybody. So everybody has that ability to have an infrastructure in place. So you're upskilling the whole school, you're developing their confidence, you're developing their knowledge. In some schools that I've worked in, we've actually trained maintenance team around self-harm and suicide and been able to assess risk. The reason for that is actually a lot of students were disclosing risk of self-harm and suicide and suicidal ideation, the thoughts that they had. The maintenance team, they're always out and about. They're usually referred to you by the first name. The same with dining room assistants and your admin staff. These are people that they don't really have any expectations of the young people because they're not in the classroom with them. So upskill everybody so they're in a position to be able to support that young person. It might be then they pass on to the designated safeguarding lead or the mental health lead, whoever that is, or it might be therapeutic support within your team. But giving people the confidence, and by not doing so and everybody referring to one person, you're actually de-skilling your team. Resources are stretched already, so if everybody's just piling everything off to one person, you're de-skilling everybody else and you're not helping other people to be in that position to be able to support children, young people, but also your staff as well. The adults are also maybe experiencing self-harm and suicidal thoughts. Nobody, it doesn't select certain people. Whether you're a professional, whether you're a young person, whether you're a parent carer, this can happen to anybody. Now, you need to review and share risk formulations. You, as a school member, are a part of that multidisciplinary team, MDT. Don't be feeling like you're on the back foot when camps come into play or these meetings are taking place and school doesn't have a voice. You're very much part of that multidisciplinary team and you see that young person on a day-to-day basis, more so than I would do as a therapist coming in and delivering 1 hour session with that young person. Also, don't forget when a young person is engaging in therapy, so when I've delivered therapy, a young person is often not in a state of distress. They're all three parts of the brain are working safe, it's working well together. So me doing things like cognitive behaviour therapy, well, of course it's going to work because the thinking brain is switched online. But when they're in a state of distress and emotional overwhelm, that thinking brain is offline. So you're often dealing and working with children where the thinking brain is offline. So why we use body-based strategies is for the body to feel safe and calm and to get engaged thinking brain again. So CBT or the talking-based therapy, yes, they have a role, but where you are and where you're supporting the young people, it's not going to help the thinking brain to come back online. And basically you're talking to them and not with them. The other part of the whole school approach as well is really thinking about whether it's the language that you use, but also how you embed trauma-informed systems. You don't want to be asking children to relive their trauma. And usually that comes from our curiosity. I wonder what's happened to them. What have they experienced? What's taken place? By getting children to retell their story, we're re-traumatizing their body. We help with that. We're making them relive their experiences. Think about how you use CPOMs and how you can link that with your safeguarding infrastructure and your whole school approach. What notifications are coming in? What is it that's raising awareness, raising pinging flags around other mental ill health? And it might be self-harm and suicidal behaviours. Now, you would have seen that I use the term mental ill health. Often we're talking about mental health. What we're talking about here is mental ill health, and it's really important that people know the difference. We've all got a mental health, but when you say, well, what do you think about when you talk about mental health? Everyone starts to say, well, it's depression, it's anxiety, not being able to cope, it's emotional pain, it might be. But actually, that's not mental health. Mental health is actually being able to function on a day-to-day basis, engage in relationships, engage in education, it might be attending school. So what we're talking about here is mental ill health. Now, how do you look at contextual safeguarding? And looking at family and beyond their home, who is it within their network? Who is it that is actually protective factors and being able to support them? And how do you integrate your whole school approach to mental health within this infrastructure? A lot of schools have been trained as a senior mental health lead through whether it's through beginners, intermediate and advanced. How do you start to then implement the audits? Because you'll all have an audit and action plan, or you should have. What does that look like in practice? Have they linked up with you? Do they know of how you embed safeguarding systems into your whole school approach to mental health strategy? How do you use existing systems to be able to support everybody's mental health so it doesn't feel like additional work to do? Now, the other thing to really be mindful is the cost of caring. Because you have empathic relationships with the students, with your staff, because you care, you will be impacted by vicarious trauma. Nobody is immune to this. It doesn't mean that you're not good at your job or you're weak or anything like that. It actually means it's because you care. And it's really unrealistic to think that actually we're not going to be impacted by it. You don't need to have directly experienced the trauma that that young person's experiencing. But by being with that young person and being with them and trying to provide those moments of co-regulation, putting yourself in their position, you're going to experience that trauma. You're going to experience vicarious trauma. How does it present? Well, when you go on your half terms, because you work in 6-7 week blocks, it's another industry that doesn't work like that. First few days, you probably get unexplained aches and pains and a cold. And you're thinking, where's that come out from? Typically, I'm unwell when I've just broken up. That is trauma being processed through the body. So if you're not able to reflect on it, to process it, then it processes through the body. So remember, the body keeps the score, and you're no different to that. Now, a way to be able to access support is through clinical supervision. Now, it's really important to think about what is clinical supervision and what's line management supervision. Often everybody gets line management supervision, and depending on who your line manager is, they might be supporting your mental health and well-being. But clinical supervision, when delivered correctly by clinicians that are experienced, so we only provide clinical supervision that's delivered by psychologists, it enables you to start processing and reflect upon the work that you're doing, the impact it's having, but also develop your psychological mindedness. How can you be more curious about your response, or a young person's response, or a colleague's response? How can you manage risk? How can you formulate risk? How can you build different models of psychological thinking? How can you get peer support so you can access clinical supervision via one-to-one and group sessions? That's something that you're interested in finding out more, and who is it that can access supervision? We provide supervision from senior leadership team, safeguarding leads, pastoral. It also might be people that are going through safeguarding processes at the moment that maybe they're under review and something's happened and it's impacting them. Don't forget, your staff have also experienced trauma as well. So there might be things that have triggered them. Now, we've got a really exciting announcement, and this is whereby we're offering 100 schools access to EduPod with 50% discount. And this is to look at how the safeguarding systems, so you're using your CPOMs, and how we can bring a whole school approach to mental health strategy, and how they can be aligned to help you embed more systemic approaches to your policies, your procedures, curriculum learning, your recruitment process. How can we support your senior mental health lead and everybody else that is on that journey to implement a whole school approach to mental health? It comes with support from those that have been there in the sector, and it doesn't matter where you are on that journey. It's a 12-month subscription, so do use that code to access it, or get in touch with us if you're looking to find out more. It's an absolutely amazing platform, and it's the only platform that exists to be able to support mental health leads. You can also apply for accreditation as well. That's free from the platform, and that's to recognise that the journey that your school's on, from being committed to achieving to excelling. Now, I'm just going to stop there and pass back over, and just to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Asha. And yeah, thanks again for joining us and sharing those really important and valuable insights. I can see from all the reactions that have been coming up from the audience that they found it all very valuable as well. As I mentioned, we will have a short Q&A before we wrap up, so please do stay tuned for that and keep sending in your questions. Before we do get to those, I'd just like to take a few moments to provide some more information about CPOMs for those of you who may not know about all that we do and how we can support your setting. So, yeah, as the market leader in safeguarding solutions, CPOM's software is currently used to support safeguarding and well-being for over 20,000 settings working with children, not just in the UK, but across 55 countries around the world. We're really proud to have a 98% retention rate as well, which means once our customers use the platforms and see what they can do for them, virtually all of them choose to stay with us as a long-term partner. And our suite of solutions is growing as well. Many of you will be familiar with Student Safe, but for those who aren't, that's our leading safeguarding platform, which can be used to record and monitor any safeguarding concerns about each child in your setting. It comes with built-in case management features, customizable categories of concerns, and controlled user access to ensure only the right people see only the right information for their role in safeguarding. And we do have several other solutions which all work in different ways to support safeguarding too. So we have Staff Safe, which is designed to help you monitor staff concerns as well as easing admin workloads and safer recruitment processes by helping you keep on top of your SCR and compliance checks such as DBS certificates. CPOM's Engage works alongside Student Safe to support information sharing between different settings and agencies at the local authority, so everyone can see a complete holistic view of every pupil and can intervene faster where needed. Recently, we launched a new product called CPOM's Insight, which is ideal for organisations with multiple sites like multi-academy trusts, allowing them at a group level to report on safeguarding across all those sites in one easy-to-use, simple system. And our most recent addition is Visitor Safe. This is a system that streamlines your visitor management processes, and it is also fully integrated with Student Safe records as well. So your visitor management is aligned with your safeguarding processes. You can find more information about all of our products on our website. You can also arrange a free demo by clicking the button in the webinar window here, which says book a demo. And don't forget to act fast to take advantage of that offer that Asha highlighted there as well for EduPod as well. So we do have some time left for a few audience questions, and thanks everybody for sending those in. Firstly, we did get quite a few questions. Asha, just perhaps asking for a bit more clarity around that swallowing behavior that you mentioned as an aspect of self-harm. Perhaps if you can give a bit more information about that. I think a few people were unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, so that was in response to different forms of self-harm. So it might be cutting, but also you might have people that are ingesting items as a form of self-harm. So for this young person in particular, she was swallowing tissue. Now, she did both. She cut herself and she swallowed tissue. She didn't do both acts at the same time. So it was dependent upon the need that she had. So if it was a want to make it all go away and be quiet, then it was tissue, swallowing tissue as a way to try and make herself unconscious. If she wanted to replace the physical pain, the emotional pain for physical pain, then it became self-harm. And that's why I was talking about understanding the function of the self-harming behaviour, because it'll be different for different people as to why they engage in different forms of self-harm.
Thank you for that. Yeah, hopefully that helps those people who asked that one. And then another good question. So could a habit, for example, picking cuticles, just be a habit, or is it a self-harm? I suppose at what point, how do you define it and draw the line?
Yeah, so picking cuticles, hair pulling, all of that. So remember, it's about the function of the behaviour. What is driving it? So is it that they're picking their cuticles, for example, to cause harm to themselves? Is it out of anxiety in terms of managing? So often we pick when we're feeling quite anxious. So is it a response to feelings of anxiety? Is it that actually it's become a habit? What we talk about is like there might be certain things where you see some people clicking a pen and stuff like that when they're quite nervous. So it's being curious about what is the function of that behaviour. There's never going to be, I can't sit here and say, well, it's definitely self-harming behaviour, because it's that function. And that's where the risk formulation comes into play. And I'm just going to share one of the slides that I had, just as a risk formulation, if this came up, you could use this way to formulate the risk. So for you to be thinking about, okay, what's going on? What's the presenting behaviour? What's risky? What is it about it being specific? What keeps the problem going, this behaviour? What might trigger it? What might minimise the risk? What do we know about this young person? And that can help them build this jigsaw puzzle. And the reason why it's a hypothesis, you remember I used the term hypothesis, is because actually you won't truly know. We're guessing, and we're making educated guesses based on the information that we have. This might throw out that you don't have any information about this young person and you're making too many assumptions. So your action is to go away and actually find out more. What else can we know? And bring everybody else involved, your administrative staff, the wider team, because actually they might have pieces of the puzzle that you don't.
Thanks for that, Asha. Yeah, that's great. Really helpful. A bit more of an in-depth question about developing those trusting relationships, which is so vital. So it's a bit of a hypothetical, I think. If a student comes to you with a history of perhaps superficial cutting or self-injury, denies any suicidal intent, wanting your support, but does not want their parents or guardians to know about their cutting history, how can a setting approach that situation and be confident that the person will continue to share information with them?
Yeah, so you've got your own policies and procedures around safeguarding and the role of confidentiality as well. Then you've also got the GILIC competency as well in place that you can draw upon. So in terms of not telling parents and carers that they're engaging in self-harming behaviours, that could be quite risky for that young person. And also at home as well, if they're not aware that young person is engaged in those behaviours, because it might be taking place at home as well. So use your typical safeguarding procedures that you'd have in place and the spiel around actually the things that you tell me. If there's anything that I'm concerned about, the risk to yourself and others, and this is risk to self, that I have a duty to share this information with other people, and that also might include parents and carers as well. Now, the reason why we say that is actually because we've got to communicate risk, and that's a way to keep that young person safe. What you might need to do is follow up with parent carer and be able to offer some support and guidance of how they now respond to that young person, because that might be something out of the blue. There might be some cultural things that are taking place. I know in the Asian community, we don't talk about those things. It might it wasn't a thing that you could talk about. They did not understand it. So it might be that there's certain families that need some education and some support of how they can be best placed to support that child. And we're trying to build up that network for that young person to keep them safe.
Thanks so much for that, Asha. We are running out of time, but there was one other one which has been asked a couple of times in different sort of guises. So, but in terms of responding, particularly in sort of younger children, perhaps primary school settings, where children might often say things like, "I'll kill myself if," or "I wish I was dead." How best to sort of respond to that positively?
Yeah, so it's always validating. So if that young person says, "I wish I was dead," or "I'm going to kill myself if I don't get X, Y, Z," you could ask the direct question: do you feel like harming yourself? Do you have any plans? How is it that you're feeling? How's your body feeling? What's going on for you right now? And keeping it very short and precise and being with them. Now, also being mindful about how you go in and ask the questions. So you might have this student that constantly is kind of saying that, you know what, I don't feel great, or I'm going to end my life. What's the point? Nobody cares. And then they engage in something. And then you want to step in and start praising that young person. Oh, amazing. Well done. You've attended. Great. You've come to school today. By you going in with that praise first offers your emotions and your feelings as opposed to asking about that young person. So it's always child-led first. How are you feeling about it? What can I do to help? Is there anything that we could do together? And even if that young person says, no, go away, you say, do you know what? I'm going to come back tomorrow. Or if you want me, I'm going to be in this room at this time. And make sure you're there and make sure you're available, even if they know, if you think they're not going to come and find me. And this is not going out your way and just sitting and doing nothing, because I know you're busy and you've not got capacity, but letting them know that you're still there. Even if they don't show, the fact that they know you're there, that's going to be helpful for them.
Thanks so much for that, Asha. Yeah, there was a few people asking fairly similar variations on that one question. I'm afraid we are running out of time, unfortunately. So thank you for everyone for submitting your questions, and sorry for those who we couldn't get through in the time. I'd like to thank everyone for listening, and a massive thank you to Asha again for joining us today. If you have enjoyed this webinar and want to join us for more or watch some of our previous ones on demand, just visit our website. You can find them all under resources and then webinars. And again, if you'd like to try any of our products, you can arrange a free, no obligation demo by simply clicking on the request a demo button right here in the webinar, or by visiting our website, cpoms.co.uk. Thanks again, everyone, and take care.
Thank you.